Hello, I'm Andrea Rose. I've edited the catalogue raisonee of Leon Kossoff's oil paintings. Before I did that, I really met Leon in 1995 when he became the British representative at the Venice Biennale. And from that moment onwards, I began to really get to know him and his work.
You worked in the catalogue raisonee for over 8 years, I think.
Yeah.
Did that give you any new insights into Leon's work?
Oh yeah. It's a huge privilege, really, to be able to look at everything in somebody's career. You know, when you go to an exhibition, you see curated selections, what somebody thinks is either a good work or a thematic work. But when you do a catalogue raisonee, it's absolutely comprehensive. So there was an awful lot of work I didn't know. There were early works that Leon did when he was 17 that show him, even at that age, from his attic window in his father's house, looking out over back gardens. And there was a fantastic arc from those very early pictures that he did when he was very young, right to the end of his career, when he's also doing back gardens. In fact, it's his own back garden in a very, very similar area of northwest London. And when you look at the totality of somebody's career, you pick up all the connections. So one of the things that became apparent to me was his interest in everything that's around him. He doesn't really have to travel very far. He doesn't have to go to landmarks. It's what's in front of him. So when he's living in Wilson, he does Kilburn Underground. Nobody's done Kilburn Underground before. It's not a landmark. When he's living in Mornington Crescent, he goes to the nearest spot where trains emerge from the Euston Tunnel. And then gradually, from the very early works, which tonally are quite dark and tend to be of single subjects, single figures, you begin to notice they get lighter. There's much more luminosity, there's much more space, there are many more people. And rather like Constable, when you look at Constable's landscapes, they're never just landscapes, there are always people working in them, in the fields. And there's usually water, surprisingly enough, in the background. So it is with Leon. There are always people around. You have always a sense of the River Thames, because all the works are in London. You have a sense of the water. So you have a sense of fluidity that runs throughout. And then they get lighter and lighter, and they're really, by the end of his life, I mean, behind me is the last painting that he ever did. It's a painting of springtime, and it's almost like a young man's painting. It's, you know, a burgeoning or something, but it's very light. It's very, about renewal. And I think one of the things that did occur to me looking at the paintings is that there is this theme of renewal. People used to talk about Leon being very gloomy and, you know, sort of a London that was very dark post-war. But what you sense is his looking at devastation, looking at loss, feeling the loss, but feeling that out of loss can come something new, and that's exciting. And that combination of the two things, both loss and exhilaration about what might come, seems to me to be a sort of absolute core of nearly everything in his painting.
This exhibition is travelling to LA in Los Angeles and Mitchell International in New York. How do you think Leon's depiction of London received by viewers unfamiliar with his hometown?
Well, it's a funny thing, isn't it? In a way, every town that you go to, and certainly every major city, has very, very similar, common elements, one of which is a metro system. Very few people have actually painted the experience. It's a very democratic, metropolitan experience common to anybody that lives in a modern city. And so Leon's pictures about tube stations, though they're very particular in the sense that it's a particular, I mean, I'm looking at a King's Cross painting there, it's a particular building behind it. I think what will be striking to people is the experience he evokes. And he's almost standing on the street with commuters. Commuting is, do you know, it's a right of living in the modern city that we all inhabit. So I think those things will be very familiar, as indeed Leon's London is not tourist London. It's not red buses and the Tower of London. And again, I think many city dwellers feel that the cities they live in are made up of suburbs, and the shops are on the corner, and the local church or the local school. So I think those experiences will not be at all unfamiliar to people. But what is very unique to Leon's pictures is London's light. New York, much harder light. LA, much brighter light. London light is very grey, modulated, and it filters through with an extraordinary nuance of colour. And I think that brings something really unique to the pictures, and I hope that anybody seeing them, wherever they do in the world, will feel, yes, this is what London feels like.
The subject in the form of Leon's figuration and the process, the abstraction and physicality of the pastel paint, appears to have been two dominant facets that seem to fight against each other in the paintings. Do you think this was a point of conflict for Leon?
It's a really interesting question, because you use the word fight, and certainly in the early pictures, there is a sense of struggling with this huge weight of lead paint. I mean, it was in the early 50s and 60s he was using lead paint in quantities I think nobody had used before. And I think the struggle for him was trying to make this viscous material respond to what he was feeling about what he was seeing. And I think you are very conscious of the process. He drags you into the process. I mean, you can't avoid it. You look at one of the pictures and right in front of you, you follow the brushstrokes. It's a very involving experience. And actually, I think that's what makes the pictures look very, very contemporary, because you become involved completely, as he was, in the process. Many of the pictures are actually sort of life-size, so you're physically drawn into them. You have to get right up close to them. And it's interesting, because I think Leon had, in all the pictures, there's a sense of, he's not illustrating something. He's trying to bring not just the duality, but the multiplicity of experiences into one still image. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And I think you do sense sometimes that the difficulty of doing that, you know, the repeat, you can actually see how he's scraped off one layer of painting and there's another layer underneath and another layer. When you look at pictures of his parents, for example, I'm always struck by the sense of, you're very conscious when you look at your own parents, you think, well, how have I come out of that, you know? But you feel this attachment, but you also want your own independence and separation. I think all of those feelings, which are a counterpoint to one another, we know where we come from, we're not necessarily sure where we're going, we're drawn to where we come from, or we're trying to get away from it. I think he brings all that into his portraits of his parents, and I think that is evident in the paint. He makes the paint work. It doesn't illustrate something. The paint sort of enacts his experience.